because we started Pre-Field, Debbie and I, in 2004, and this was one of the first churches that we came out and met with, and that's going way back, Steve, isn't it? Yeah. That's going way back, and you know about that. One of us had a little bit less gray hair or more hair, one of those, but boy, isn't God faithful. And I'd like to read just a few verses from Psalm 89, and really this is, in a nutshell, what I have to say to the church. Just want to bring these words and then flesh it out with how we've seen these words really become reality in our own lives and ministry. The psalmist says, "I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth will I make known thy faithfulness to all generations." Can you pick up on the theme that I'm going after? Verse 2, "For I have said, mercy shall be built up forever. Thy faithfulness shalt thou establish in the very heavens." The faithfulness of God. Who of us can say that God has not been faithful? God has been abundantly faithful. And we've seen this in our ministry in Milan, Italy, Rozzano, to be precise, on the outskirts of Milan over these past, 16 years that we've been on the field. And we would like to share a little bit about what that faithfulness has looked like for us. As I said, unfortunately, my family is not with me. Debbie, Luca, Chiara, and Sophia are not with me. And what can I say? Thank you for letting me come, even though I come alone this time. And if you notice that I'm a little bit happier than usual, maybe, it's because they come tomorrow. Tomorrow they arrive after a month of being separated. They had to stay back in Milan, and the kids had to finish up with school and then get some last things done before they come over here. So tomorrow I'll pick them up, and the fun continues as we travel around, visit our wonderful supporters, wonderful supporting churches. We'll be out in Michigan for our next little period of time starting next Saturday, and the fun will continue as we seek to share with all of our dear brothers and sisters what God has been doing in our neck of the woods. Well, it looks like our technology has left us, so thankfully our lives and our ministries do not depend on technology. Amen? Somebody said about Jesus, he was low tech, high touch. Have you heard of that? He was all about personal touch, personal involvement with people, and he didn't use technology. We use technology, right? It can be helpful, but this evening we're going to talk about Italy and about what God is doing without the technology. So I'm going to talk for a while, and then we're going to open up to the floor, and if there are any questions that you would like to ask about the ministry, about what God is doing, that'll be your opportunity for the next 4 years. So make sure you take advantage of that opportunity. So, what can we say about Italy? You all are experts in the country of Italy because every 4 years you hear about it, at least, if not more. But Italy is a wonderful country. It's a wonderful country to visit. The people are wonderful. It's wonderful to go there to do tourism. How many of you have been to Italy? Okay, we got a few people here. The rest of you, open invitation to come visit us. Just don't all come at once, but open invitation to come. Italy is a beautiful country. People are wonderful. But one of the realities that we don't think about a lot when we think about Italy is the spiritual need that Italy represents. And it's hard to paint a picture, brothers and sisters, about what that spiritual need is really like. Here are some ways that I try to kind of make it understandable. The first thing that we can kind of wrap our minds around is the fact that only 1% of people in Italy are Christians, are born-again believers, Protestants, evangelicals, whatever we want to use. 1%. So I was reading an article not too long ago about the church in Holland. And this man that was writing was lamenting the fact that in Holland, 30% of Dutch people are Christians. Oh, we've fallen on hard times, 30%. And I was reading that and saying, well, in Italy, we have 1%. So in this country, 1% of the population claims to be of the Wiccan religion, spirituality. Have you ever heard of Wiccan? The Wiccans? You've heard of them. When was the last time you ran into somebody that practices Wiccan spirituality? Basically, Wiccan is witchcraft mixed with a little bit of paganism. So I just use that illustration to help us to think about what it would be like for you to live in Italy as an Italian, and 1% of the population is Christian or evangelical. You wouldn't have a coworker, most likely. You wouldn't have a family member, most likely. You wouldn't have anybody in your immediate group of friends that is a Christian. We lived in our apartment there in Rozzano, which is a town on the suburbs of Milan. And in our apartment complex, there were five stairwells, so 15 families, because there were 3 apartments on every floor. So how's that for math? So in our greater piazza, or group of buildings, there were another 7 of these apartments, just like ours, another 7 of these 15. In our wider apartment complex, there were 700 families. Never ran into an evangelical Protestant Christian for the 10 years that I was there. And that's just a small area of Rozzano, of Milan, and of all of Italy. A little bit of an idea of what the Christian population is in Milan. 90% of missionaries leave the field in their first term. 90% have had it after the first 2, 3, 4 years. We've been there, as I said, 16. We've seen many people come and many people leave. And why is that? We talk about that a lot in Italy, among pastors, among missionaries. Why is that? Why is there such a high fallout rate? I think one veteran missionary put it well. He said, in Italy, it requires a lot of effort, a lot of output to have a very small result. And if you were to put that same effort, that same output, outreach, activities in another country, you would get a whole bigger result. So that just points to the general discouragement that many people coming to Italy can experience. The bottom line is simply that Italy is a difficult field. It's just a tough nut to crack, if I can put it that way. It's hard. It's just hard to find people that are open to spiritual things, that are interested in the Bible or in things having to do with God. That's just the basic reality of the place we minister in called Italy. So, now that we're all discouraged, what a downer, I'm also here to bring good news. The good news is that God has been faithful. God is faithful. And in this dark panorama that I've just painted, there is a light, and there are other lights, but the light that I would like to speak about this evening is the ministry that we have seen God establish and is now helping to make flourish, Veritas Evangelical Church. Veritas Evangelical Church. Veritas, we planted it. I said we've been there 16 years, but the church exists since 10 years. And those first years were involved with other ministries and especially with just trying to get the church planted that now exists. But it exists since 2011, so we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. The church, by God's grace, has grown. I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, but We have about 120 people on a Sunday morning by God's grace. We have a lot of young families. I have a lot of pictures of the young families that are part of our church. And God has brought young families to Veritas. And Veritas, I kind of like to explain it this way. How can I explain the grace of God seen in Veritas Church? Well, I like to imagine Italy as a sea of unbelief. Sea of unbelief. And I like to think of Veritas as a toothpick floating on that sea of unbelief, incredulity, apathy. But then I have to catch myself and say, no, that doesn't really explain it. Because Veritas, you see, is like a toothpick, not in a sea of unbelief, in a universe of unbelief. In a universe of families and people and masses that just don't believe. They have either never heard the gospel, most likely, or they've had a little bit of a taste of it, or so they think, through the Catholic Church that has inoculated them. It's given them a little taste of the fake thing, so they think that they've had a taste of the real thing, and when you talk about Jesus, they say, no, I've already been there, done that, not interested. But wait, let me tell you about the real Jesus of the Bible. Well, they don't always give you time to do that. Veritas is plugging away. Veritas is a reality that now exists where previously it did not exist. It's very encouraging. God is at work in Milan. God is at work in our ministry. And, you know, as I was thinking about speaking with all of you this evening, I really felt the desire to share the fact that God is doing some special things in our ministry. You don't find churches of over 100 people in Italy. You just don't. You don't find churches that have young people with families. Debbie, she wrote to me about one of the last Sundays, and she said they had 10 babies under the age of 2 in our little nursery, very small. It's about 3 meters by 3 meters. I'm not sure what that would be, 3 yards by 3 yards. You don't find that often in Italy. You don't find often a man like Paolo Di Nunzio. He's one of the pastors there with me. He's Italian. You don't find men like Paolo often who are called to the ministry and who are involved with the ministry. He preaches alongside of me, and even though he works full time as a banker, he also works for the church. You just don't find some of these elements that we are seeing God raise up in Italy. And I don't say that to toot our own horn or to try to make you guys think something about us that's not true. It's all God's grace. It's all something that God has done through our partnership. First Baptist of Medford, the Joneses, together working to bring the gospel to a barren, barren place like Italy, and God has been faithful. Italy and Veritas present unique challenges. One of the challenges, you can be praying for this. I'll speak about some prayer requests towards the end. But one of the unique factors maybe about Veritas is that the church lives very spread out. So, especially in this last term, we've seen people starting to come to Veritas Church from an hour away, 45 minutes away. And so this creates challenges for the body to live the life of the body. So many times their only contact with other Christians will be on Sunday morning when they can come to church and they can be with the rest of the body of believers. That creates challenges. The rest of the week at work, the rest of the week with their families, they're constantly being bombarded with everything that is contrary to the gospel. But those are some facts about Veritas Church. And I really hope that you will be encouraged by this news that we are bringing to you. Last term, what can we say about last term specifically? Well, the last term, first thing that we can mention is that we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, as I mentioned. That was a big deal. That is a big deal. It's a big deal that you are here this evening after all we've been through, right? We don't take that for granted. Our doors are still open. The church hasn't split, everything has been up for grabs this last 2.5, 3 years. And by God's grace, we celebrate our 10-year anniversary. The Lord has kept us united as a body. The Lord has added believers to the body called Veritas. And so we're thankful for that. Well, what else marked last term? I don't need to say this. COVID. COVID. Oh, my goodness. Will we ever get out of COVID? Who's tired of hearing the word COVID? Yes. Well, so COVID, maybe you follow the news, maybe not. I'm here to be your news provider. Italy was really the center of the COVID outbreak for all of Europe and the States. We were ahead of many of the other countries. And it's interesting, our area, Lombardia, Milan is in Lombardia, that would be kind of like the state, I guess you could say, was the epicenter of the COVID outbreak. And a town about 40 minutes from us, Castelpusterlengo, I'll ask you to repeat that later. About 45 minutes from our house is where they found, what do they call that? The ground zero or the first? Patient zero. Thank you, brother. Patient zero, Castelpusterlengo. So we're like everybody else, but we're closer, so we're watching the army blockades. And we're watching people, the army coming in and cutting off the streets, and we're like, what in the world is going on? And, we had to deal with it like everybody else did. But, COVID presented some unique challenges, but I always like to say it presented some unique opportunities as well. Do you agree? And one of the things it did for us is that in Italy, like it did here, but in Italy, it had a pretty incredible impact. We all went online, and the message was able to get out. The message of the gospel was spread far and wide. So interestingly, our church, Veritas, actually grew during this season of COVID. And we were meeting in a different auditorium. We couldn't meet in what I like to call the warehouse. It is a warehouse, but we've, kind of made it nice so it's where we meet as a church. But we know that the church isn't the building, right? The church is the people in the building. But we were meeting at the warehouse, then we were meeting at an auditorium, and the auditorium was maybe twice as big as our warehouse. And people came and people were added to our church body. That was an interesting thing to observe this last term as we were all working through the lockdowns and going online and this and that. So we saw evidences of God's grace in this period. Another interesting thing that we've seen God do in this last term, these last 4 years, is He's been raising up leaders in our church in Veritas. And so this last term, Dragos, he's 23. He was in Rome. I got to know him, and won't go into details, but he wanted to do an internship at our church. So he came up. Now he's married to Letizia. So a young couple that has kind of joined, linked arms with us to carry forward the ministry. That's an encouraging thing when you have young guys that say, I want to serve God. I want to find my place with you, Keith, and Paolo, the other elders. So that's been very encouraging. We have other leaders that are kind of coming to the surface. Orazio, Paolo Vinci. These are other men that they can see. I don't know how can we put leadership skills, kind of boil it down. They can see beyond just the daily or the weekly church service, and as important as that is and that faithfulness, they can look up ahead and say, no, we could see how God could grow the Italian church and bless the Italian church, and we want to be a part of that. Paolo, Orazio. And then my dear brother Paolo Di Nunzio. He has also been taking great steps towards taking more responsibility in the church. I hope you can meet Paolo Di Nunzio one of these years. Paolo and Sara, we have actually set up a prayer letter back at my display table. So you can sign up to the Joneses prayer letter if you haven't already signed up for that. But there's also the Di Nunzio prayer letter, which he's going to begin sending out. And Paolo Di Nunzio, boy, he's the whole package. I'm just so thankful God has brought him to Veritas Church and to work together with me. He is a solid Bible teacher. He loves the Lord. He's a man of prayer. And I don't need to tell this to you all. You already know this, but the end game for Debbie and for me is to work ourselves out of a job. That's why you sent us over there, and that's what we know is our job over there. It's to get the church where it needs to be, where it can have Italian leadership, and then the Joneses can move on. And Lord willing, plant another Veritas, plant another church in this very dark country. So, Paolo is another man that God has been bringing to the forefront in these last years, and he's preaching for most of the months that I'm here in the States, and he's been a real blessing to us. So what can we present as our idea of what we can envision for the next term, moving forward? Well, our big objective, our big goal that we have put before ourselves for the immediate future is we are needing to find a new meeting place for Veritas Church. And I might get the video to the church somehow. We have a nice video where we summarize the ministry, and we also present this need to our churches and friends and supporters of what we're trying to do. We have outgrown our warehouse. Our warehouse seats about 100 people. And as we were meeting in the auditorium, people had to sign up, so that's the only way we knew a little bit how the number of people that are in the orbit of Veritas at 150. And we had an average attendance of 120 during those months when we were in the auditorium. So we've outgrown the present meeting place. And we're trying to raise funds to be able to purchase a new meeting place. The price tag for this project is $390,000. But the amazing thing is, as we were praying and thinking through this, we talked to people at our home church, we talked to people at our mission, and then we put it to the church. We put to Veritas Church, and we said, "Dear church, we think God is moving us in this direction. Church, are you with us? Do you see this like we see it?" And we put it to the church, and the church promised to give 100,000 euros to the purchase of a new building. And now we are, by God's grace, looking to bring in the rest. So be in prayer for that. We would ask you, we're trusting the Lord to bring in the remaining $267,000. That's what we still need to raise. And it's going to allow us to do what makes my heart beat, which is to plant firmly the flag of the gospel in Milan. I get excited when I just say that. Plant firmly the flag of the gospel in Milan, because if we can free up the funds that at the moment are going to the rental of the place, we can then begin supporting, as a church, our own pastor. And that allows us to have an Italian church that is self-supporting, self-sustaining for generations. Firmly planted in the Italian soil. That's one of our main goals, and we're trusting the Lord to do that. We have other goals as well. We are also starting. We already did start, and before COVID, we were already kind of going in the right direction. We have started home groups or cell groups. As I said, our church draws people from a wide area around Milan. And so for the weekly gatherings, we're trying to meet in homes, and that allows us to do various things. Maybe it's easier for an Italian to come to a home group and hear the story of Jesus. I was going through the Gospel of John in my home group, and maybe it's a little bit more accessible. Maybe it's a little bit more easy to enter into that context than going into a church setting. So that's another one of our goals. One of our other goals is I would like to have a trip with Paolo and Sara in the next year or so. That's something that we could envision for this next term. Another big goal on our radar is leadership development. That's what we're going to continue to be investing in. And so we're going to continue to do what we did last term, which was we had seminars, we did conferences. We had to be creative during COVID. And one of those ideas, I doubt it was mine, but somebody had the idea, well, Keith, you have some of your seminary professors out in Grand Rapids, maybe they could do some training on Zoom to the Italians. And we did it, and you know what? We had a pretty good turnout. We had about 30 people that came to our warehouse, to the church building, and about 60 that were online, because we had the professor that was on the screen, but whoever wanted to tap in via Zoom could also participate. So we had people from Sicily up and down the boot participating in these seminars. So we're going to continue to do that. By God's grace, we're going to continue to try to give information, give training to many Italian people that wouldn't have access to it otherwise. Remember that the churches that do exist are mostly led by not even bivocational men, but by lay leaders. So that means guys that are working jobs 40, 50 hours a week and then trying to lead a church. So they don't have time, a lot of times, to go into a more developed Bible school. But what we did seem to be scratching an itch where they were. So I'm looking at the clock. It looks like we have about 17 minutes. What I'm going to do now is open it up to the floor if there are any questions. I remember I need to be done by 7-ish. And if we take all the time, that's great. If not, I'll add some